We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for our final video lesson of the year. Yo, I said it. Yes, that is true. But we still have more work to do. I'm going to explain at the end of this video what happens from here on out. But we're wrapping up the curriculum today. So if you want to know what happens next, you have to watch the whole video. And don't try to be smart and fast forward to the end because you're going to miss a lot of good information. I got the hair. The hair needs to be cut. Open the barbers. We need the barbers. The Corona beard I thought would be a fun experiment, but every day I grow more and more tired of this thing. It needs to go. Representing Seaside Heights, New Jersey, where I plan to be in just a couple of months' time. I'm gonna go DTS, as they say here in Jersey, down the shore. Trip planned for August. We'll see. We'll see if it happens or if we have to cancel. I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. But in any case, enough of the introductory remarks. Let's get into it. We ended here last time talking about grunge subculture. Just to review, what are some things that are dominant in the grunge subculture? We're talking about disappointment, kind of a disillusionment with mainstream society. You might draw a parallel to that today, right? You might draw a parallel to that today. The Zoomers, you guys, I'm not sure if you realize this, but kind of have a reputation for kind of being apathetic, whatever, right? Kind of the same with the Gen Xers here in the early and through the mid 90s. Okay, so you can kind of relate to that maybe. Angry, sad, frustrated lyrics. We have this desire to stick to the indie scene, right? You don't want to sell out, so-called sell out by signing to a major record label. Let's see. In contrast to like the hair metal of the 80s, which were big stage productions with pyrotechnics and laser lights and things like that, the grunge performances were kind of the opposite of that, right? They were more focused on the music, didn't really have too much of a stage show, really. It was just basically them on stage with their instruments doing the songs. And the fashion of grunge. Every kind of movement in music has its own particular fashion. There's more to it than just the music. We've also mentioned that in the past. And what was the fashion of grunge? Well, comfortable clothing to convey apathy towards fads and trends. Typically, you're going to see a lot of flannel, long hair, ripped jeans, t-shirts, and that type of thing. And of course, we mentioned that it's centered in Seattle, Washington. And the three bands that we're going to talk about today are all centered in and around Seattle. And the first one we're going to talk about is the band that consisted of Kurt Cobain on guitars and vocals, Dave Grohl on drums, and Chris Novoselic on bass. Does anyone recognize this band here, these three faces that you see on your screen? If you said Nirvana, you are correct. I see a lot of Nirvana t-shirts out there on some young folks, and whenever I see like a 12-year-old in a Nirvana t-shirt, I often think, do they even know one Nirvana song? Most of the time the answer is probably no, but just so you know, the Nirvana is more than just a t-shirt. They were a very groundbreaking band in the 90s. Let's talk about Nirvana a little bit more. They were formed in Aberdeen, Washington, which is just outside of Seattle, in 1987. A lot of people don't realize that they were formed that early on because they didn't become popular until much later. The band was originally Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic, and they went through a long succession of drummers, many different drummers, kind of a revolving door of drummers before 1990, when Dave Grohl would join the band, and he would stick with them all the way through their very end in 1994. Dave Grohl, you also may have heard the name before. He would go on to become the lead singer of a band that is still around making albums today called the Foo Fighters. And you know, his face has been everywhere. He's been on Sesame Street. He's been on what's the Miss Miller told me about the show where like the guy it's like the little kid who unboxes toys. He's been on that YouTube show. He's been on Yo Gabba Gabba. He's been on a lot of kid-friendly stuff, but he is you know, very much a rocker. Okay, don't let the kid stuff fool you. He's very much a rocker. They chose the band Nirvana because it sounded beautiful in contrast to the angry sounding names of some of the punk bands from around that time. I won't say those names, but it is reasonable to say that grunge kind of was an offshoot of punk, and especially the hardcore punk of the late 80s kind of offshooted into this new genre of grunge. So yeah, so they had this very kind of grunge sound, and they thought, hey, you know, let's have a kind of a pretty name to contrast with the sound, and also it contrasted with the other bands that were around in that time. All right, next we're going to talk about Pearl Jam, one of my faves. Pearl Jam formed in Seattle in 1990 with members Eddie Vedder, Mike McCready, Stone Gossard, Jeff Ament, and Matt Cameron. Of all of the grunge bands, they are probably the more political band. They take a page out of the, you know, the protest folk movement from the 1960s, where they do tend to get pretty political. This is also evident in the fact that they've covered a lot of songs by Neil Young and artists from that time period, Bob Dylan, people like that. And but you know, they have a lot of other songs that are just like, you know, good grunge songs. I would say they're probably the most melodic of the grunge bands too. And you know, I'm going to link a lot of some good representative videos for them. They famously fought against Ticketmaster about improper ticket marketing and price gouging in certain cities. Okay. Also, you know, Ticketmaster, you know, had a kind of a monopoly on ticket sales, and they, you know, were in protest against that. Pearl Jam still boycotts Ticketmaster to this day. They don't use them to sell tickets to their concerts. But yeah, so that is Pearl Jam. Let's move on now to Soundgarden. Okay, so Soundgarden. If Pearl Jam was the more melodic of the grunge bands, then Soundgarden is by far the most like heavy metal, I guess you can say. They have the hardest sound, kind of the grungiest sound, like maybe you could say. And they were founded in 1984, believe it or not. Okay, so they were around for a long time before they really hit it big. The members are Chris Cornell, Kim Thayil, Ben Shepherd, and Matt Cameron. And Matt Cameron you might recognize from Pearl Jam. And indeed, he was the drummer for both bands at different times. Sometimes he would be in one group and then leave and join the other. But there was there was always a good relationship between Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. As a matter of fact, there was a band called Temple of the Dog, and Temple of the Dog was kind of a mishmash of members from Pearl Jam and with members from Soundgarden. So they had both frontmen, Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell, sang in the band, and the other members of the band were kind of mixed between the two groups. Matt Cameron was the drummer. And I'm going to link probably their most famous song, Temple of the Dog, which is called, what's the name of the song? Hunger Strike. Yes, of course. Okay, so Temple of the Dog, Hunger Strike, I'll link down there. And you can hear how Temple of the Dog really kind of combined the Pearl Jam sound with the Soundgarden sound. I said they're very heavy metal, and sadly we have to say here, we have to mention the kind of the sad ending to the story of both Chris Cornell and Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain. So Kurt Cobain, we mentioned before in another lesson that he is a member of the 27 Club. He died when he was only 27 years old, and it was self-inflicted. Okay, so he committed suicide, which is very sad, and believe me when I tell you that this really shook the music world at the time. Kurt Cobain really was the voice of his generation. That's kind of a cliched thing, but it really is true. Nirvana was such a groundbreaking band, and Kurt Cobain really exemplified the grunge ethic, and it really changed the music industry for years and years and years to come. And as far as Soundgarden goes, with Chris Cornell, he actually also committed suicide, but much later, just a couple years ago. He was in his 50s, I believe. Really just tragic. I think as far as the grunge bands go, Soundgarden was always my favorite. I always loved Chris Cornell as a vocalist and a lyricist, and just really very, very sad. And I think there's something teachable there, because I think sometimes we look at celebrities, we look at our favorite singers and artists, and we glorify them and we romanticize them, but really they're just people like you and I. And like all people, there are struggles, there are high points and low points. And oftentimes, I think what you find here in this world of fame and fortune, there is some humanity is lost in that kind of world, and it can be, certain people deal with it in a very, very hard way. So, let's remember these people, let's honor them for their music, but we can also look at them for their flaws and realize that, maybe this this lifestyle of the rich and famous to, to use a term, is maybe not all that it's cracked up to be. But I don't want to end on a sad note. I think maybe we can go and talk about um, what happened to rock after the 90s, which is in itself maybe a little embarrassing. Okay, so in the late 90s, this is kind of post-grunge. You had a new these crazes of music, and the one style in particular known as nu metal. That's NU hyphen metal. And nu metal was we'll say it's very interesting. Okay, it's kind of a uh, mashup between rock and rap. Okay, many of these nu metal bands had a DJ in the band. Um, I'm going to be honest, it's not great music. When I was in eighth grade, when I was your guys' age, I loved this stuff. And looking back on it now, it is kind of embarrassing to think that, you know, I would listen to this. It's very nihilistic. You can look up that word on your own. But it's, you know, it's kind of just, it's really a lot of noise, really a lot of noise. And I know I'm not making great criticisms of it right now, you know, but it's you listen, you know, take a listen yourself and you tell me what you think. Okay, we're talking about bands like Korn, Korn with a K, Limp Bizkit with a Z, and these types of bands it was really it kind of brought back the party atmosphere of the 1980s, but with way worse music. It's very angry sounding as well. I think that's maybe why it's a little off-putting, because it's very angry. But kind of party music at the same time is like it's like angry partying. It's like party. It's like going to a party, but you're really angry. If you can imagine that. Okay. But as we get into the early 2000s and nu metal starts to wane in popularity, you do have two bands in particular who are kind of carrying the torch for rock and roll. One is Dave Grohl's Foo Fighters. We mentioned Dave Grohl became, after he was the drummer in Nirvana, he became the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, and you know they are still putting out great music. I think their last album just came out maybe like 3 years ago. But you know, so up until very recently, they're still cranking out really awesome music. I definitely recommend the Foo Fighters. And the other band that was kind of carrying the torch for rock and roll is a band called Audioslave. And Audioslave is a very interesting band because it's a super group in a sense. It's the band members minus the singer from another 90s band called Rage Against the Machine. I'm not sure if any of you guys are Rage fans, but Rage Against the Machine was a very interesting band from the 90s. So it's those musicians minus the singer, and in his place they put Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. So it's Chris Cornell from Soundgarden as the singer with the Rage Against the Machine musicians as his backup band, I guess you could say. That's kind of dismissive of you know, that downplays the roles of those musicians in the band, I think, to call him his backup band. But you understand what I mean. And they had a couple of albums, really awesome stuff. And I would say that these two bands really kind of carried the rock music scene through the early aughts, the early 2000s. And once we hit the 2010s, well, this is where rock music really starts to wane in popularity in general. Sometime before 2010, I think like 2008 or something, New York City, the #1 radio market in the country, and that that would have included New Jersey, Southern Connecticut, Long Island, the whole tri-state area. Uh, we lost our rock radio station, which was 92.3 K Rock. Okay. The station since, as I'm sure you're aware, has gone through many different format changes. It was a pop station for a while. Now I think it's kind of a rock station. I don't know. I've listened to it, and it's kind of alternative, right? At one point, it was an FM talk station. It had all different talk shows on it. So it's changed format a lot in the last like 10 years, but for throughout the 90s, it was like the go-to place for rock, and that's where you would go to hear all the new bands. And because there was a venue for a radio station for new bands to have their music heard, those bands became popular, right? But once New York City lost its rock station, things kind of fell apart for rock music. It's like, I mean, that's just one of many factors, but for us living in the tri-state area as we do, it kind of speaks to us in a sense. Uh, but what kind of rock music? It's not like it completely goes away. I don't think rock music will ever completely go away. But what we had here is kind of the uh, indie folk revival with artists like Bon Iver and Gautier. Remember Gautier? Remember that song? Now you're just somebody that I used to know somebody. Remember that song? You don't remember that? That was kind of a good song for a minute. It's very kind of hipstery, right? This is the 2010s. This is where like hipster culture really kind of uh, gained traction. Okay, but this was not holding up in the popular arena. Okay, so rock music kind of waned a lot in popularity during this time. And that brings us to now, our current decade, the 2020s. And in the past couple of years, what we've seen here is we've seen a bit of a revitalization. I think it has a long way to go still, but what we have are some bands that are kind of still in that indie arena. Bands like Cage the Elephant, okay, who I think just won the Best Rock Grammy. They're kind of more of an indie style band, but a little bit more of a harder edge than like a Bon Iver or a Gautier or even an Arcade Fire. And then you have um, the retro bands, right? The retro bands. And this would include bands like Rival Sons, Greta Van Fleet, bands like that who are rediscovering rock's golden age kind of in the 1970s, which for a lot of people, grew up on this music, or maybe their parents introduced them to this music, and now they are starting their own bands that have this, kind of old school feel. And in my opinion, I think this is where rock music really needs to go to capture its former glory. I think we need to kind of go back to when it was really, really popular. And the 1970s is just as good a place as any. So we listen to bands like Rival Sons and Greta Van Fleet. We can get a glimpse of what would have happened if that like classic rock never ended. And I think from here, rock and roll is in very good hands. So, folks, that's gonna do it for us for the semester. Now, this won't be the last time we see each other. Remember, we have on Friday, June 5th, we are talking on Zoom with Mike Miley from the band Rival Sons. If you have not sent your questions in, please do. And remember, that is mandatory. It will be Friday at 12 noon. And I'm instructing you, if you have other things at that time, unless it's like a test or something, cancel it, right? This is the one mandatory virtual live thing that I'm asking of you. So I want 100% attendance. Let's see if we can make that happen. And starting in our next class, you're going to be assigned our next and final project. You have one more project to do. It should, I'll give you the normal amount. I think normally I give you 3 or 4 class days to complete it. I'll go into more detail in the next class, but basically what your job is going to be, you are going to be the manager of a band. I will give you a list of suggested bands, but if you want to pick one from off the list, that's okay too. But it has to be a rock band, okay? And so if you have any question on whether or not it's good or if it's appropriate or not, just ask me and I'll let you know. But I'll give you a list of suggestions for bands to pick. And then what you will have to do is you're going to be the manager of that band, and you're going to try to sell your band to me, who is the owner of the concert venue where you want your band to perform. So you're going to say, okay, Mr. DeJoseph, you are the proprietor of Madison Square Garden, and I want to bring in Billy Joel to do a concert, and you're going to give me some information about Billy Joel. You're going to try to convince me that it's a good idea to have him. Now, Billy Joel, like, he, his reputation speaks for himself, but I want you to give me as much information that would make me want to bring him in. Now, there's more details and stuff, but I'll let you know next time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask through the normal venues here. But yeah, so that's going to be it. Man, it's been kind of a crazy semester, but you guys have hung in there well, and I look forward to hearing about all of your future success at THS and beyond. So put her there, folks. Virtual handshake. Have a great day, and I will talk to you very soon. Goodbye.